Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for coming together to join in our study of Torah and adding to the wisdom of Torah through our conversation. I learned so much when we are together, so thank you very much. We will start in just a moment. We are in Parshat Balak, which begins in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, verse 2. And if you'd like to go ahead and unmute, we'll go and recite together our blessing for this opportunity of being together in the immersion of Torah. We say our blessing. Baruch
atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asot divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity to immerse ourselves in words, deeds, and relationships of Torah. Once again, we are in the book of Numbers, chapter 22, beginning at verse 2. If everyone could go ahead and remute, I'll lead us off with recitation of a few of our verses, and then I'll invite others to have the opportunity to read some verses as well. Then I'll share a little bit of focus study, and then we'll open it up for everyone's reflections and comments on this week's Torah portion. Balak, son of Zippor, saw all that Israel had done to the Amorites. Moab was alarmed because that people was so numerous. Moab dreaded the Israelites, and Moab said to the elders of Midian, "Now this horde will lick clean all that is about us, as an ox licks up the grass of the field." Balak, son of Zippor, who was king of Moab at that time, sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor in Pethor, which is by the Euphrates, in the land of his kinsfolk, to invite him, saying, "There is a people that came out of Egypt. It hides the earth from view, and it is settled next to me. Come then, put a curse upon this people for me, since they are too numerous for me. Perhaps I can defeat them and drive them out of the land. For I know that he whom you bless is blessed indeed, and he whom you curse is cursed." We're now at verse 7. Richard, would you like to read a little bit there at verse 7?
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. The elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, versed in divination, set out. They came to Balaam and gave him Balak's message. He said to them, "Spend the night here, and I shall reply to you as the eternal man struck me." So the Moabite dignitaries stayed with Balaam. God came to Balaam and said, "What do these envoys want of you?" Balaam said to God, "Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. Here is a people that came from Egypt and hides the earth from view. Come now and curse them for me. Perhaps I can engage them in battle and drive them off." But God said to Balaam, "Do not go with them. You must not curse that people, for they are blessed."
Thank you, Richard. And then let me invite June. Would you like to unmute and read a little bit beginning at verse 13?
Thank you, Rabbi. And Balaam rose up in the morning and said unto the princes of Balak, "Get you into your land, for the Lord refuses to give me leave to go with you." And the princes of Moab rose up, and they went unto Balak and said, "Balaam refuses to come with us." And Balak sent yet again princes, more and more honorable than they. And they came to Balaam and said to him, "Thus saith Balak the son of Zippor, let nothing, I pray thee, hinder thee from coming unto me, for I will promote thee unto very great honor, and whatsoever thou sayest unto me, I will do. Come therefore, I pray thee, curse me these people." And Balaam answered and said unto the servants of Balak, "If Balak would give me his house full of silver and gold, I cannot go beyond the word of the Lord my God to do anything small or great. Now therefore, I pray you, tarry ye also here this night, that I may know what the Lord will speak unto me more." And God came unto Balaam at night and said unto him, "If the men are come to call thee, rise up, go with them, but only the word which I speak unto thee, that shalt thou do.
Thank you, Jude. Dave, would you like to read some beginning at verse 21?
When he arose in the morning, Balaam saddled his ass and departed with the Moabite dignitaries. But God was incensed at his going, so an angel of the Lord placed himself in his way as an adversary. He was riding on his she-ass with his 2 servants alongside, when the ass caught sight of the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand. The ass swerved from the road and went into the fields, and Balaam beat the ass to turn her back onto the road. The angel of the Lord then stationed himself in a lane between the vineyards with a fence on either side. The ass, seeing the angel of the Lord, pressed herself against the wall and squeezed Balaam's foot against the wall, so he beat her again. Once more the angel of the Lord moved forward and stationed himself on a spot so narrow there was no room to swerve right or left. When the ass now saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam, and Balaam was furious and beat the ass with his stick.
Thank you so much, Dave. Margot, would you like to read beginning at verse 28?
Then the Lord opened the ass's mouth, and she said to Balaam, "What I have done to you that you have beaten me these 3 times?" Balaam said to the ass, "You have made a mockery of me. If I had a sword with me, I'd kill you." The ass said to Balaam, "Look, I am the ass that you have been riding all along until this day. Have I been in the habit of doing this to you?" "No." And he answered, "No." Then the Lord uncovered Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way, his drawn sword in his hand. Thereupon he bowed right down to the ground. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Why have you beaten your ass these 3 times? It is I who came out as an adversary for the errand is obnoxious to me. And when the ass saw me, she shied away because of me these 3 times. If she had not shied away from me, you are the one I should have killed while sparing her." Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I erred because I did not know that you were standing in my way. If you still disapprove, I will turn back." But the angel of the Lord said to Balaam, Go with the men, but you must say nothing except what I tell you." So Balaam went with Balak's dignitaries.
Thank you so much, Mark. And Ruth, would you like to read beginning at verse 36?
Such a good story.
Yes, thank you, Rabbi. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at Moab, which is on the Arnon border at its farthest point. Balak said to Balaam, when I first sent to invite you, why didn't you come to me? Am I really unable to reward you?" But Balaam said to Balak, "And now that I have come to you, have I the power to speak freely? I can utter only the word that God puts into my mouth." Balaam went with Balak, and they came to Kiriath Zoth. Balak sacrificed oxen and sheep and had them served to Balaam and the dignitaries with him. In the morning, Balak took Balaam up to Bamoth Baal. From there, he could see a portion of the people.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And Martine, would you like to read at the very start of chapter 23?
Thank you, Rabbi.
And there she is with the she-asses.
I don't know if it's a she or not. Oops, I think I lost my
I'm sorry.
place.
Yeah. Verse 1, chapter 23.
Ah. Oh, there we go. Sorry. I apologize. Balaam said to Balak, build me 7 altars here, and here have 7 bulls and 7 rams ready here for me. Balak did as Balaam directed, and Balak and Balaam offered up a bull and a ram on each altar. Then Balaam said to Balak, stay here beside your offerings while I am gone. Perhaps the Lord will grant me a manifestation, and whatever is revealed to me, I will tell you. And he went off alone. God became manifest to Balaam, who stated, I have set up the 7 altars and offered up a bull and ram on each altar. And the Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth and said, return to Balak and speak thus. So he returned to him and found him standing beside his offerings and all the Moabite dignitaries with him. He took up his theme and said, keep going?
Sure.
Okay. From Aram has Balak brought me, Moab's king from all the hills of the east. Come, curse me, Jacob. Come tell Israel's doom. How can I damn whom God has not damned? How doom when Adonai has not doomed? As I see them from the mountaintops, gaze on them from the heights. There is a people that dwells apart, not reckoned among the nations. Who can count the dust of Jacob, number the dust cloud of Israel? May I die the death of the upright. May my fate be like theirs.
Thank you so much, Martine. And Robin, would you like to read at verse 11?
Yes, thank you. Then Balak said to Balaam, what have you done to me? Here I brought you to damn my enemies, and instead you have blessed them. He replied, I can only repeat faithfully what Adonai puts in my mouth. Then Balak said to him, come with me to another place from which you can see them. You will see only a portion of them. You will not see all of them, and damn them for me from there. With that, he took him to Sedazophim on the summit of Pisgah. He built 7 altars and offered a bull and a ram on each altar. And Balaam said to Balak, stay here beside your offerings while I seek a manifestation yonder. Adonai became manifest to Balaam and put a word in his mouth, saying, return to Balak and speak thus. He went to him and found him standing beside his offerings and the Moabite dignitaries with him. Balak asked him, what did Adonai say? And he took up his theme and said, up, Balak, attend, give ear unto me, son of Zippor. God is not human to be capricious, or mortal to have a change of heart. Would God speak and not act, promise and not fulfill? My message was to bless. When God blesses, I cannot reverse it. No harm is in sight for Jacob, no woe in view for Israel. Their God, Adonai, is with them, and their kings acclaim in their midst. God who freed them from Egypt is for them like the horns of the wild ox. Lo, there is no augury in Jacob, no divining in Israel. Jacob is told at once, yea, Israel, what God has planned. Lo, a people that rises like a lioness, leaps up like a lion, rests not till it has feasted on prey and drunk the blood of the slain.
Thank you, Robin. And Steve, would you like to pick up and at verse 25 and read for several verses?
Sure, thank you. Thereupon Balak said to Balaam, don't curse them and don't bless them. In reply, Balaam said to Balak, but I told you, whatever the Eternal says, that I must do. Then Balak said to Balaam, come now, I will take you to another place. Perhaps God will deem it right that you damn them for me there. Balak took Balaam to the peak of Peor, which overlooks the wasteland. Balaam said to Balak, build me here 7 altars and have 7 bulls and 7 rams ready for me here. Balak did as Balaam said. He offered up a bull and a ram on each altar. Now Balaam, seeing that it pleased the Eternal to bless Israel, did not, as on previous occasions, go in search of omens, but turned his face toward the wilderness. As Balaam looked up and saw Israel encamped tribe by tribe, the Spirit of God came upon him. Taking up his theme, he said, "Word of Balaam, son of Beor, word of the man whose eye is true, word of one who hears God's speech, who holds visions from the Almighty, prostrate, but with his eyes unveiled. How fair are your tents, O Jacob, your dwellings, O Israel, like palm groves that stretch out, like gardens beside a river, like aloes planted."
Okay, Steve, I think we've got a frozen image of you there. So let me ask Paul, would you like to
Them
read?
from Egypt is for them like the horns of the wild ox. They shall devour enemy nations, crush their bones, and smash their arrows. They crouch, they lie down like a lion, like a lioness. Who dares rouse them? Blessed are they who bless you. Accursed are they who curse you.
Thank you so much. Paul, would you like to read beginning at verse 10?
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, enraged at Balaam,
Steve?
Balak struck his
Steve?
hands together.
Steve?
I called you, Balak said to Balaam, to damn my enemies. Instead, you have blessed them these 3 times. Back with you at once to your own place. I was going to reward you richly, but the Eternal has denied you the reward. Balaam replied to Balak, but I even told the messengers you sent me. Though Balak were to give me his house full of silver and gold, I could not of my own accord do anything good or bad contrary to the Eternal's command. What the Eternal says, that I must say.
Thank
And
you,
now,
Steve.
as I go
Steve?
back to my people, let me inform you of what this people will do to your people in the days to come.
Okay, thank you. And then Paul, would you like to
We couldn't
pick
hear,
up?
I couldn't hear you.
Paul, would you like to pick up reading there at verse 15?
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, Steve. He declaimed his parable and said, the words of Balaam, son of Beor, the words of the man with the open eye, the words of one who hears the sayings of God and knows the knowledge of the Supreme One, who sees the vision of Shaddai while fallen and with uncovered eyes. I shall see him, but not now. I shall look at him, but it is not near. A star has issued from Jacob, and a scepter bearer has risen from Israel. And he shall pierce the nobles of Moab and undermine the children of Seth. Edom shall be a conquest, and Seir will be the conquest of his enemies, and Israel will attain success. One from Jacob shall rule and destroy the remnant of the city.
Thank you. Let me invite Jim. Would you like to read a little bit beginning at verse 20?
Yes, Rabbi, thank you. He saw Amalek, and taking up his theme, he said, a leading nation in Amalek, but its fate is to perish forever. He saw the Kenites, and taking up his theme, he said, though your abode be secure and your nest be set among cliffs, you shall Cain be consumed when Ashur takes you captive. He took up his theme and said, alas, who can survive except God has willed it? Ships come from the quarter of Kittim. They subject Ashur, subject Eber, they too shall perish forever. Then Balaam set out on his journey back home, and Balak also went his way.
Thank you, Jim. And Jay Iser, would you like to read a little bit at the very start of chapter 25?
Thank you, Rabbi. While Israel was staying at Shittim, the people profaned themselves by whoring with the Moabite women who invited the people to the sacrifices for their God. The people partook of them and worshiped that God. Thus Israel attached itself to Baal Peor, and the Lord was incensed with Israel. Adonai said to Moses, take all the ringleaders and have them publicly impaled before Adonai, so that the Lord's wrath may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to Israel's officials, Each of you slay those of his men who attach themselves to Baal Peor.
Thank you, Jay. Let me invite Mark. Would you like to read a little bit at verse 6?
Thank you. Just as one of the Israelites came and brought a Midianite woman over to his companion, in the sight of Moses and the whole Israelite community who were weeping at the entrance of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas, son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest, saw this, he left the assembly, and taking a spear in his hand, he followed the Israelite into the chamber and stabbed both of them, the Israelite and the woman, through the belly. Then the plague against the Israelites was checked. Those who died of the plague numbered 24,000.
Thank you so much. That's our entire Torah portion for the week. Anna says we forgot part of it.
Well, we didn't forget part of it. We just didn't hear a couple of verses.
Okay, would you like to
Yes, I
repeat
would.
them?
Like gardens beside a river, like aloes planted by Adonai, like cedars beside the water. Their boughs drip with moisture. Their roots have abundant water.
Thank you, Anna. We've been busy in our backyard garden, and it requires a lot of watering. And in return, we have a very rich forest-like backyard garden.
And we have planted 2 cedar trees.
And we've planted 2 cedar trees. Thank you. Okay. Thank you all very much, everyone. I'd like to share with you just a little bit of focus study, and then we will open it up for everyone to have their comments. And to paraphrase one of the great sages of our time, Margot Hoffer, what a story. Okay. So,
So exciting.
okay. So indeed, it is quite a remarkable story, this incident of Balaam and his ass and who's that speaks and so forth. So if you have a study sheet that I've sent out, I'd like to note that at the very top, I've entitled it, Open My Eyes. So we're going to explore a little bit here about what is happening in terms of eyes being opened. How do these eyes become open? What do they see once they're open? And perhaps place it in the context of the entire book of Numbers as we have been encountering it so far. Also on the study sheet, I have a painting by an artist, Ann Nielsen, called Open My Eyes in Wonder. Ann Nielsen is an artist who infuses into her paintings her own Christian spirituality. And a lot of her paintings have to do with angels. So here is one of her angel series. And I would characterize as there are 2 angels there, and there's in between these 2 angels, there's either another figure or a great light. You might have your own interpretations about what's going on. And I don't know whether she came up with this title, Open My Eyes in Wonder, in response to the book of Psalms. But in the book of Psalms, we have Psalm 119, which it has this verse 18, that reads, Open my eyes so that I may behold the wonders of your Torah. And of course, this was attributed to King David. And King David, in this very, very, very long Psalm 119, is expressing a kind of a pleading with God to not abandon him, to infuse him with wisdom, to recognize that he's struggling to follow the ways of God. And indeed, the very last verse 176 in Psalm 119 says, King David admits, I have strayed like a lost sheep. Please, God, search for your servant. So in the middle of all this, he's acknowledging, actually at verse 19, I'm only a sojourner in the land. And he's asking for God to open his eyes that he can behold the wonders of Torah. So we're going to explore this notion about opening the eyes. And again, I'd like to place it within the context of the book of Numbers as we've been reading it so far. So the book of Numbers opens, I characterize it as rather optimistically, because it describes all the tribes organized and arrayed around the Mishkan, and everyone has an assigned place. Everyone has an assigned place in the line of march when it comes time to decamp and move out. And within the tribe of Levite, there are families who have specific assignments for how they're supposed to take care of the Mishkan. So everything seems well organized and ordered, and they're ready to move forward to the promised land. Very quickly, as we have seen over the past several weeks, that sense of order begins to disintegrate. Indeed, the very sense of purpose and discipline begins to collapse. So here are some of the aspects of that collapse, which has to do not just with how they act, but I want to suggest has a lot to do with how they speak. And so here are some of the specific incidents that we've already read about over the last few weeks. The first of them, interestingly enough, comes from the people who are perhaps the closest to Moses, his own brother and sister, Miriam and Aaron, who raised some question about Moses serving in the leadership capacity, perhaps criticizing the woman that he married. We remember that incident where it ends up with Miriam being struck with some kind of skin disease, and Moses has to pray to God to heal her. After that incident, we have the incident of the 12 scouts, one from each tribe, who are sent forward into the promised land to scope out the territory, to see who lives there, to see what grows there, to see what the topography is. And these scouts come back, and 10 of them say it's beautiful, but we'll never be able to possess it. And the way the tradition reads their response is it's both an insult to God, it's an insult to themselves, and it's a rejection of the land which was promised to them. So it is this bit of speech that is seen as so undermining of the people's own sense of resiliency that they begin to question whether they are capable of doing the fulfilling the mission. And that's when God says, no, they're not. They're going to spend another 38 years wandering, and it'll be the next generation that enters into the land. After that incident, we had the incident with Korach, who's a cousin of Moses, who raises a question also about why should you be the one to lead us? Didn't God say we are a nation of priests, that all of us are holy? Why shouldn't any one of us be entitled to assume the position of leadership? And leads a rebellion against Moses. And then finally, interestingly enough, we had our last week's portion, Chukats, where this dissolution, this collapse of proper speech even infects Moses. Because if you remember the story, God instructs Moses to speak to the rock in order to draw water out of it. And instead of speaking to the rock, Moses takes his staff, hits the rock, and yells at the people, listen, you rebels, what are we supposed to do? Get water out of this rock for you? And so Moses himself now seems to be infected with this corruption of speech. So here we are. And I want to suggest that what's going to happen in this week's Torah portion is we're going to have an attempt to somehow correct, kind of rebalance this corruption of faith, this corruption of speech that has infected the entire Israelite people. And very curiously, it's going to come from a very unusual place. It's not going to come from one of the heroes, one of the leaders of the Israelite people. It's going to come from a pagan priest, and it's going to come from his donkey. Okay, so here's on our study sheet, we have number 1 from our Torah portion. The ass saw the angel of Adonai taking a stand in the path. But the great irony here is that Balaam is supposed to be a seer, right? He's supposed to be able to see into the future. And here is a seer who can't even see what his own jackass can see, which is that there's an angel of God standing in the way. Okay. And then it's not until this jackass speaks to Balaam and says, "Why are you hitting me? Have I ever done such a thing to you?" In response to which Balaam says, "No, you're right. I've never done that." And in response to Balaam's acknowledgement, that's when God then uncovers Balaam's eyes. And that's what comes in verse 31. Then Adonai uncovered Balaam's eyes and he saw. As I was reading and studying this week's Torah portion in preparation for tonight, all of a sudden I started thinking about another story about someone who's not able to see what it is he's supposed to be doing, and in fact begins to try and flee from this responsibility. Because part of what's happening here with Balaam is this ongoing defiance of what God is instructing him to do. And so I thought of the story of Jonah. And I thought of the story of Jonah because not only is Jonah someone who's been given a mission that he's reluctant to perform, but what happens in the story of Jonah is that there are all these pagan characters who are able to see more than what the Hebrew prophet Jonah is able to see. The first time we come across that is when Jonah gets in a ship and he's fleeing from God. And so he gets on a ship to sail away from his responsibilities. And there's a storm that gets stirred up. And the sailors in this ship, who are all pagans, they were in great awe of Adonai, says the text. They offered a sacrifice to Adonai and they made vows. So here are these characters who are outside of this stream of this designation that's been given to the Israelites, these pagan sailors. They are able to see something and to respond to it in a way that Jonah himself is not able to. And then when Jonah finally does get to Nineveh and says in very short warning, everyone repent or in 40 days you're all going to be destroyed, immediately the text says the people of Nineveh had trust in Adonai, and the king of Nineveh rose from his throne, the text says, and he says, let everyone turn back from their evil ways and from the injustice of which they are guilty. So here are these characters who are not Israelites, they're pagans, and they quickly see something and they quickly respond to what it is that they see, far more than Jonah himself. It's reminiscent of actually the way the Torah itself opens up with our story of creation, because we have two characters, Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve are given a mission, they're given instructions, and they quickly veer from what that mission is. And in verse 8 of chapter 3, we read these words: they heard the sound of God moving about in the garden, and the man and his wife hid from Adonai. At the very beginning of the whole of all of creation, we have human beings who seek to run away from the mission that they've been given by God. They hide from God. And I want to suggest part of what's happening with Balaam at the very beginning in our story here is that he is very reluctant to adhere to everything that God asks him to do. He has some ulterior motives, our commentators tell us, which has to do with wanting to get a lot of money, wanting to get gold and silver, wanting to be treated with great respect, insisting in effect that more dignitaries come to beg to have him come to serve Balak. So here we have, at this point in our story, especially since the incident with the scouts who went into the land, it has become increasingly evident that the Israelites are not journeying in fulfillment of the divine mission. They're actually in retreat from it. And so this week's Torah portion is going to provide us some kind of correction for that retreat. And it's going to offer us some kind of redemptive aspect and open us up to the possibility that perhaps the Israelites still carry with them some sense of hope that will enable them to fulfill the mission. And it's a wonderful story that these curious characters, a seer who's oblivious to what's before him, and a braying beast that's the one who's able to see the divine presence. So if you have the study sheet, you can turn over, and we're going to explore a bit of commentary on this conflict that Balaam represents about whether to curse or whether to bless. And this is from the Sfat Emet, one of the great Hasidic rabbis, late 19th century. And he quotes from our Torah portion, "What may I curse that God has not cursed?" And then Sfat Emet goes on with his commentary. "This wicked man sought out the precise moment of divine wrath, of which it is said in Psalms, God is wrathful each day. But this wrath lasts only for a moment, since it also says in Psalms, the compassion of God is all day long. The entire goal of the wicked is to find that moment of wrath. The righteous, by contrast, seek out the goodwill of heaven. In Psalms, as for me, my prayer is for a time of goodwill. Even beyond that, they seek out the thread of grace that exists in this world. This world is indeed founded on judgment, but still a thread of grace is found each day. The righteous seek to find that point of grace or time of goodwill. The wicked, by their evil qualities, bring about divine wrath from above. But we still find that goodness is more plentiful. When the righteous succeed in finding grace in this world, all that the wicked do is not able to take that grace from them. When the wicked seek to gain strength from that moment of anger that exists in heaven, God holds back the anger. This war goes on every day. It also takes place within the individual Jew, and we have to arouse the quality of grace every day. Sfat Emet, who's following, of course, in the Hasidic tradition of delving into the psychological depths of humanity more than ascending into the mysteries of the cosmos. I think what he's trying to share with us is that we, in our very human imperfections, are images of God. And that only a God who knows an inner anger against which God struggles can be with us as we ourselves struggle each day for the little victories of love and grace over impatience and anger. And so I'd like to focus a little bit at this point about the message that Balaam is able to share once his eyes have been opened. What exactly is it that he sees and is able to share? And it is, of course, a verse that is in our liturgy. Ma tovu olecha Yaakov, mishkanecha Yisrael. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel. Rav Kook, one of the great Kabbalistic rabbis of the 20th century, he looked at that verse and said, why does it say tents and dwelling places? And why does it say tents, O Jacob, and dwelling places, is associated with Israel. And let me bring someone in, okay? And what Rav Kook indicates about tents and dwelling places is this. He says that as we strive to grow spiritually and emotionally, we make use of two seemingly conflicting methods. One is our aspiration to constantly improve ourselves, to attain greater wisdom, to refine our emotions, and to ennoble our spirit. The other method is the necessity to restrain this striving for growth, to internalize the gains, to assimilate changes, and to protect against our ambitions overextending our capacity for change. So when Rav Kook looks at tents and dwelling places, he says, the tent represents one of these methods, and the dwelling places represents another. Both are temporary shelters, he acknowledges, but the tent, Rav Kook says, is inherently connected to the state of traveling. It corresponds to the aspiration for continual change and growth. The Mishkan is also part of the journey, but it's associated with the rest in between the travels. It's the soul's sense of calm. It's rest from the constant movement for the sake of the overall mission. And Rav Kook says that the desire to settle, to pause, is actually a source of greater nourishment than the ongoing striving to want to be better. But he said both of these are necessary to have a sense of ambition, a sense of the desire to change and refine ourselves, and then the urge to stop, to rest, and to assimilate everything that we've learned. So here's what Balaam acknowledges once his eyes have been opened, that there are tents and there are dwelling places, and that we have these aspirations and these ambitions to grow beyond our current state of being and spiritual being and emotional being. And then there are also these dwelling places, the Mishkan, the place where we can pause, assimilate what we've done, and perhaps most importantly, create community thereby. So with that, I'd love to open it up and hear what provoked you, what interested you in the course of our study this evening. If you'd like to raise your hand, love to call upon you. So Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I realized at the last minute, the two words in your 5, where you talk about anger and wrath.
Yeah.
And while I'm sitting here, I thought about just the big picture, that the anger first. Now, I'd like to talk and defend the people of Israel, that you have a bunch of people who were slaves, and now they're told there's a country X downstream, and I'm gonna give you that country, and along the way you're gonna have to go through a bunch of wars, and if you win a war or two, forget about it. You're gonna go to X. So those people, of course, when they get angry, that seems to get the wrath of God. But it's easier for me to understand the wrath of the Israelites, that they got a tough road to hoe, and also, what about that X? That's the big fight, and to this day, and so it troubles me that I can understand anger, the anger of the people, but the idea that that God is so wrathful, that keeps coming up over and over again. And also my kids used to always get after me on that. So now I put it to you because I couldn't answer those questions.
Here's what you make me think of, Paul. I go back to the Sfat Emet, and I go back to the whole Hasidic orientation, which is basically stop thinking so much and worrying so much about God and what God's doing. Start thinking about yourself and what you are doing. And And so the Hasidic orientation is to stop looking up to the cosmos and start delving deep within inside. And so what the Sfat Emet here is doing is saying, we've inherited this bit of divine DNA, that there is something that is within us that perhaps even righteously is sometimes angry and wrathful. But what would life be like if we were that way 23 hours a day and just feeling compassionate and kind 1 hour of the day? What the Sfat Emet is suggesting is it's the reverse. That the reverse is that, especially if we are healthy, that we will have a sense of anger and we'll have a sense of wrath, but it will be a minimal aspect of what our daily life is going to be like. Far more of our life will be taken up with a sense of appreciation, gratitude, awe, and wonder. So the way I'm responding to the issues that you've raised is it's important not to focus on this God character as something outside of us, but rather to focus upon these divine qualities that dwell within each one of us. Okay. So others who had Dave and then Susan.
Okay, this is kind of a silly comment, but it seems like every time they stopped, they built seven altars, sacrificed 7 bulls and 7 rams. That seems like a lot of altars and a lot of bulls and rams that are sacrificed.
It does seem like a lot. I agree. And which I guess is an indication of how valuable they treat this particular relationship. Maybe that's what it represents.
I don't know.
A sense of value, some metric of value. Okay. All right, and Susan?
So I'm struck probably every time we do Torah study at how I constantly hear or see or understand differently something that I've read before. And I'm very grateful to you for the insight that you bring and walk us down with great explanation of all of these things and the comments from others like Paul. But I just wanted to say that I also really appreciate Margot and her seeing it through her eyes for probably the first time. It's just very refreshing and almost childlike. It's great.
Yeah, I truly, yeah.
Go ahead,
Truly, I'm
Margot.
always upset when we end because I want to read for the story to move on.
I always bless the newcomers because they have this. They have the same reactions that I had a long time ago, and are now totally fresh to me again. And
even though this is not really the first time that I've read. I mean, that I've read it, but well, it's the first time that I've read it. In actually the Torah. Yeah. I know the stories.
Just wanted to say.
School,
How wonderful to be able to read these stories each time as a new experience.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all. Okay, and Ruth, would you like to share something? And then Martine?
Jay also has his electronic hand in the air.
Thank you for pointing that out. I'll get to you in just a second, Jay. Thank you, David. Ruth? And you'll have to unmute, Ruth.
Okay, yes, along with the line of what Susan was saying and Margot, this strikes me as so fancy. It's so fanciful. I mean, I guess it's up there with, Jonah and the whale, except somebody just got swallowed by a whale last week and survived. But it's so fanciful. It reminds me of, it's like those kids' fairy tales, like Jack and the Beanstalk, you're walking along. they're walking along with the cow, and so it was all these stories that run together, the golden goose and the cow and the like Aesop, these ancient stories that we learned as children. It has qualities like of that, and I can't even begin to really understand or comprehend the totality of the message of this parashat. I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. I'm not even beginning to get it, but I can't get over the fact that that donkey sees the angel. It's like, not only does the donkey talk and have this whole thing going on, but the donkey can see the angel, and that's pretty amazing. Like the animals can see the angel too. It's also amazing, like wondrous or something, like connected to nature in a way that we don't always think about. So that struck me this time.
Well, I like the words that you're using, like fanciful and wondrous, and these are stories that are designed to appeal to our imagination and maybe to unlock our imagination and to get us out of the realm of just thinking about these in rather humdrum fashions and kind of dealing with reality on a very different level. So I think that's lovely that you're pointing that out.
Thank you. I have one. Can I say, I have one other question?
Of course.
For what you were describing earlier in your focus study, they weren't following the will of God. Well, how do we know what the will of God is? I'm talking about, like, how do I know what the will of God is? There's some way it's supposed to be. We're supposed to somehow know that and follow it. And if we don't do it that way, we're in a state of rebellion or fleeing. These are big questions that I always struggle with, endlessly. But how do we really know what God's will is, or what the ultimate plan is? We're supposed to somehow follow, and if we're not doing that thing, we're not okay. We're not following the way it's meant to be or supposed to be. How do we know these things even?
Let me. Richard here has his hand up. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, I hear what you're saying, and I want to tie it to what Rabbi said about wrath is a piece of God that we have inside of us. And what I got out of this portion is two things. One, Balaam is not just Balaam. Balaam is a priest of some kind, pagan or whatever. But the notion here that I got out of this is you can't just get some powerful priest to go out there and tell God what to do. You can't do it. You can't ask him to smite your enemies. You can only go to him and say, I'm in a fix here. Help me figure this out so I can move forward. Help me get inside to make a balance so I'll know how to behave. And the other piece I got was, that's to the priests, and then to the Jews, to the Hebrews, this is a people of privilege. I mean, God is looking out for us always. And that's a piece of privilege. And this seems to me to be saying the people of privilege need to set a good example, not to monetize their station. Wow. So that's what my response was.
Wow. Thank you, Richard. Okay, let me go to Jay. Go ahead.
Rabbi, first of all, David will probably be interested that Safat Emet was Yehuda Aryeh Leib altar, L-E-I-B altar. So there may be a great rabbi in David's past. What does Safat Emet mean? Is it related to the city of Safat?
No, it's about the word of truth, okay.
The word of truth. Okay.
Yeah.
Not spot.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was a question asked. What is God's will? I think God's will is the very thing that we're doing during this hour. God's will is to question and to perceive. It's to open your eyes and look and to find divine revelation in the most unsuspecting places. You remember Lassie always knew that there was someone in the well. I mean, come on, that's a dog. So, right? So what I'm saying is that I believe looking at all of these, let's move the cursing from this place to the next. Maybe you can curse them there. Maybe not. Well, maybe we'll build it all again. You can curse them there. I think in the Hasidic tradition, which is making a lot more internal sense to me, these are all conflicts that we have within each and every one of us. To what point will we go to prove a point, or to prove something to a God in the heaven when we're actually being disingenuous to ourselves and our people? Why are we constantly trying to do things en masse? Why the spies came back and said they're as huge as whatever, they're gonna da, da, da. And then these elders of the other tribes, not Jewish, said they're gonna devour our plains like sucking up all the grass, and they're huge. And I think that with this enormity of tragedy that might come and all, reminds me very, very much of not moving forward and not becoming spiritual, very similar to what this country and the free world experienced in the last decade of fear, what if? Let's find another way to curse them. And if we can't curse them that way, because cursing them is the only way to get something done, people not following their own instincts, and people not basically minding their own business. That's what I find in it. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. And let me, who else would like to share? Okay, so let me get to Martine and then David. Go ahead, Martine.
Thank you, Rabbi. And I think it's a heck of a story, even though I've read it many times in Torah study with you, and with other Torah study groups. And darned if I didn't see something different today. Usually I am really irritated with Balaam for beating the donkey, because it's not the donkey's fault. And this time I realized, it's not really Balaam's fault. It's the angel. The angel set this in motion by blocking the donkey. God, or we can say religion, or we can say, government, we can say politics, we can say whatever, sent, the messenger, the envoy, in this case, the angel or the messenger, to stir up trouble. And I think, to me, it's telling me to look deeper at underlying causes, to really take a look at, not just looking at people or causes or things with whom or with which I disagree, but looking deeper at what's behind that, what messenger is setting them up the way that Balaam was set up. And really trying to understand the underlying causes of whatever the problem is, rather than just seeing, an easy enemy. So that's kind of what I got.
I love your focus on messengers, and I'll say something about that in a second. Let me call on David.
Thank you. Reading the Torah portion, I had two main puzzles. One was, why is this Torah portion broken up the way it is by the rabbis, with essentially it's the story of Balak and Balaam, but then at the end you essentially get the pinkish story, at least the dramatic part of it. And so I've been wondering why it didn't end with this end of the story. But the other one was, what is the donkey and the angel story in the middle of the Balak Balaam story? Why is it there? Why is it there? Is it trying to tell us something about Balaam that's going to be important, understanding how it behaves afterward? It just seemed to drop out of nowhere. But listening to Margot and listening to Ruth and the question of how do we know God's will, and suddenly I went this kind of cartoon aha, which was, well, I maybe don't know why the story is there, but obviously the message of the story is it's really, really, really hard to know what God's will is, what God wants of us. And it's very important to ask the donkey lady next to you what she sees in order for you to be able to see what might actually be needed.
David, how wonderful.
Okay, thank
How
you.
wonderful.
What these are such rich and innovative insights our people are having tonight. I'm so grateful, and I'd like to conclude by going back to the painting that's on our study sheet, and to acknowledge and to focus on, in a sense, Ruth's question about how do we know God's will. And I think what Sfat Emet also is trying to get us to think about is that God's will is something that we create when we're living in a holy way. And so we go back to the Mishkan, and we go back to why the Mishkan becomes an instruction for us. And to remember that while some faith traditions, the mission in some faith traditions is for people to get to heaven. And in the Jewish tradition, it's the opposite. It's to bring heaven down to earth. And that's what the Mishkan is about. It's creating that space that allows God to dwell here. And how does God come to dwell here? It's not because of a building, it's because of what people do to create that building. It's the activity of creating the Mishkan that causes God to dwell among us. And then at the very heart of that construction project, inside the Holy of Holies, is the ark with cherubim, 2 angels. And God says, I will meet with you in between them. And so we have these 2 characters, these 2 angels, these 2 beings who are looking at one another, and they're looking simultaneously down at the ark where the instruction is. And so you have these 2 beings who are engaged in this relationship with one another. And it's in between them that the presence of God will appear. So in this painting, now I'm looking at this painting differently. Now I'm looking at this painting as being 2 cherubim. And that bright, burning presence in between the 2 of them is the presence of God, who is now dwelling there, because these are 2 beings who are in relationship with one another. And that's how we bring about the will of God, by being in relationship with one another through acts of kindness, respect, and love.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to be with all of you to help bring about the dwelling of the presence of God on this earth. Thank you all very much. Look forward. Hopefully we'll actually be physically present with some of you next Thursday at 5524 as you're away. Those who are not able to be there in person, we will continue to have our Zoom and our live stream on Facebook. God bless you all. Thank you so much. Be well, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.